October 14th, 1944, 2:34 in the afternoon. Aachen Corridor, Germany. Oberfeldwebel Klaus Richter pressed his weary eye against the Panther's periscope, searching for movement along the cold, grey treeline. His crew had been hunting American armor for 6 hours, a routine hunt that felt more like work than war. That morning, they had destroyed 2 Shermans with predictable efficiency. He remembered watching the 75mm shells punch through their armor at 800 meters, confirming what German tank doctrine had always preached. American tanks were dangerous only when they got close. Beyond 500 meters, they were just targets. Another turkey shoot, he had joked to his driver. Another day proving that German engineering still ruled the battlefield. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Then through the autumn mist, something appeared. It wasn't a Sherman. It wasn't even a proper tank. It was squat, oddly shaped, and open-topped, almost unfinished in appearance. Its sides were angled sharply, and instead of a turret, there was only a thin shield wrapped around a long, protruding gun. To Richter, it looked almost comical. A machine built by someone who understood war only from blueprints. He smirked. An M10 Wolverine, the Americans' so-called tank destroyer. German crews had a different name for it: Blechdosse, tin can. Lightly armored, open to artillery fire, and helpless against German guns. Panther crews collected them the way hunters collected antlers. But something felt different. Richter watched longer. The mist thinned. The sun revealed the gun, longer than he remembered. Thicker, more purposeful. His gunner noticed too. "Das ist kein normaler 10," he muttered. "That is no ordinary 10. The rangefinder confirmed it. 1,300 meters, well outside the range at which an M10 could do harm. At least, that had always been true before. Richter's confidence hesitated. He gave the order to fire, but the Wolverine fired first. The impact shook the Panther. Not a ricochet, not a glancing blow. A punch. The loader froze. The gunner swore. Richter's eyes widened. Not from pain, not yet, but from realization. This tin can could kill them. The creeping fear that followed did not come from the enemy's gun. It came from knowing that everything he had believed about American armor was now uncertain. Richter actually laughed into the intercom. The M10 was positioned at what looked like 1,200 yards, an absurd range for engaging a Panther. At that distance, even if the M10's 3-inch gun could penetrate, which Richter doubted, the chances of a first-round hit were minimal. German doctrine taught that American tank destroyers were defensive weapons meant to ambush from concealment, not engage in direct duels. His gunner acquired the target, but Richter held fire. Why waste an expensive 88mm round on something that posed no threat? Better to close the distance and use the machine gun. Save the main gun ammunition for real threats. In exactly 11 seconds, Klaus Richter would become one of the first German tankers to discover that the Americans had been lying about their tank destroyer capabilities for over a year. The M10 Wolverine that sat in his sight wasn't carrying the 3-inch gun his intelligence charts showed. It was carrying a 76mm high-velocity gun that could punch through a Panther's frontal armor at ranges German crews thought were safe. The mathematics of battlefield deception were about to be written in steel and blood. For 18 months, German tank crews had treated M10 encounters as target practice, never knowing they were facing weapons that could kill them at distances they considered invulnerable. The story was about to change in a way that would shatter German tactical assumptions and create a crisis of confidence that would spread through the Panzerwaffe faster than any Allied advance. The foundation of German confidence. The German tankers' dismissive attitude toward American tank destroyers had been earned through hard experience since the North African campaign. When M10 tank destroyers first appeared in Tunisia in 1943, German crews quickly learned their capabilities and limitations. The original M10 mounted a 3-inch gun, essentially a 76mm weapon, but with limited penetration compared to German tank guns. The M10's armor protection was deliberately light. The front glacis measured only 38mm at 55 degrees. The gun shield protecting the crew compartment was 57mm at 55 degrees. German intelligence had documented these specifications thoroughly. A single hit from virtually any German tank gun would penetrate, and the open-topped turret meant crew casualties from artillery airbursts were common. German tactical manuals from late 1943 classified the M10 as a second-tier threat, dangerous from ambush positions against side armor, but not a match for German tanks in direct engagement. Tiger and Panther crews were taught to engage M10s immediately upon identification, but without the urgency reserved for facing other German tanks or the few British tanks that posed real threats. The psychological advantage was reinforced by combat results. Throughout the Italian campaign in 1943 and 1944, German tank crews maintained favorable exchange rates against M10s. A Panther could typically destroy an M10 at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. The M10's 3-inch gun struggled to penetrate Panther frontal armor beyond 500 meters. Veterans of panzer divisions that fought in Italy described M10 engagements as routine. The open-topped design made them vulnerable to everything from tank rounds to artillery fragments. German crews developed standard tactics: identify the M10 close to medium range while maintaining frontal aspect, destroy with a single shot, move on to the next target. This confidence extended beyond Italy. When M10s appeared in Normandy in June 1944, German panzer crews approached them with the same dismissive attitude they'd developed in the Mediterranean. And intelligence reports continued to list the M10 as carrying a 3-inch gun with known penetration limits. Every engagement seemed to confirm what German crews believed. The M10 was a defensive weapon, dangerous only from ambush, easily destroyed in direct engagement. But unknown to these confident crews, 7,000 kilometers away in American factories, a critical modification was being made to M10 production. Engineers were installing a new gun that would transform the tank destroyer from a defensive weapon into something that could threaten German heavy tanks at combat ranges German crews considered safe. The secret modification program. The M10A1 modification program began in September 1943, but under such tight security that even most American tank destroyer crews didn't know about it initially. The program involved replacing the original 3-inch M7 gun with the 76mm M1A1 high-velocity gun, the same weapon being installed in upgunned Sherman variants. The 76mm M1A1 represented a significant leap in American anti-armor capability. Firing the M93 armor-piercing capped ballistic cap round, it could penetrate 109mm of armor at 1,000 yards. The newer T4 high-velocity armor-piercing round, which began reaching frontline units in late 1944, could penetrate 133mm at the same range. These penetration figures meant the upgunned M10 could threaten Panther frontal armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards and Tiger side armor at even greater distances. More importantly, it could do so from ranges where German crews believed themselves safe based on intelligence about the original M10's capabilities. The modification wasn't just about installing a bigger gun. Engineers had to redesign the gun mount, modify the recoil system, and adjust the turret balance. The work was done at Fisher Tank Arsenal and other facilities already producing M10s. The modified vehicles were designated M10A1, though externally they looked identical to original M10s. The secrecy surrounding the program was extraordinary. Modified M10s shipped to Europe were documented with the same technical specifications as original M10s. Crews trained on the new guns at facilities isolated from other units. Field manuals for the M10A1 were classified above secret. Even maintenance personnel at forward depots often didn't know they were servicing vehicles with different guns. The deception extended to battlefield procedures. M10A1 crews were ordered to avoid long-range engagements whenever possible, maintaining the illusion that American tank destroyers couldn't threaten German armor beyond 500 meters. When M10A1s did engage at extended ranges, reports were carefully worded to avoid revealing the weapon's true capabilities. By October 1944, approximately 350 M10A1s had reached frontline units in Europe, distributed among standard M10 battalions. German intelligence had captured several destroyed M10s, but either hadn't recognized the gun modification or hadn't disseminated the information effectively. German tank crews continued operating under the assumption that all M10s carried the original 3-inch gun. The stage was set for a technological surprise that would rival the Pershing's appearance. Unlike the Pershing, which was an entirely new vehicle, the M10A1 looked identical to a weapon German crews thought they understood completely. The psychological impact would be even more severe. First blood in the Aachen Corridor. The engagement that killed Klaus Richter's Panther on October 14th, 1944, was recorded in the action report of Company B, 899th Tank Destroyer Battalion. The M10A1, commanded by Staff Sergeant Raymond Pierce, had been positioned in a hull-down position at approximately 1,300 yards from the German advance route. Pierce had identified 3 Panthers moving towards his position in column formation, apparently unconcerned about threat at that range. German doctrine called for dispersed formation when facing anti-tank threats, but these crews were moving in road column, suggesting they didn't consider Pierce's M10 a serious threat at that distance. Pierce's gunner, Corporal Michael Donnelly, acquired the lead Panther in his sight. The mathematics were challenging. At 1,300 yards, the target filled barely a hand's width in the sight reticle. Wind was gusting at 8 miles per hour from the left. The Panther was moving at approximately 15 miles per hour, requiring significant lead. Donnelly fired. The 76mm T4 round left the barrel at 2,600 feet per second. Flight time to target was approximately 1.3 seconds. The round struck the Panther's frontal glacis at the junction between the hull and turret ring, one of the few vulnerable points on the Panther's frontal aspect. The penetration was catastrophic. The tungsten carbide penetrator punched through the 80mm armor plate, still carrying tremendous kinetic energy. Inside the crew compartment, the penetrator fragmented, sending steel fragments through the fighting space at supersonic speeds. Klaus Richter died instantly, along with his gunner. The driver and radio operator survived long enough to evacuate before ammunition cooked off. The second Panther in column stopped immediately, its commander apparently trying to identify what had happened. At 1,300 yards through battlefield haze and smoke from the burning lead tank, identification was difficult. German crews had been trained that M10s couldn't effectively engage at such ranges. Pierce's M10 fired again. The second round hit the stopped Panther in the turret face, penetrating the 100mm armor and destroying the tank. The third Panther reversed rapidly, disappearing behind a tree line before Pierce could acquire it. The engagement had lasted less than 2 minutes. 2 Panthers destroyed at a range German doctrine said was safe from American tank destroyers. The surviving Panther commander, Feldwebel Hans Dietrich, made it back to battalion headquarters and filed a report that would trigger an intelligence crisis. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Dietrich described being engaged by what appeared to be an M10 tank destroyer at a range exceeding 1,000 meters. Both destroyed Panthers showed frontal penetrations impossible according to known M10 capabilities. Either Dietrich was badly mistaken about the range, or American tank destroyers had capabilities German intelligence didn't know about. Similar reports began filtering in from other sectors. An M10 destroying a Panther at 1,100 yards near Nancy. Another engagement near Metz, where M10s engaged Panthers at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Each report was initially dismissed as range estimation errors or misidentification of American weapons. But the pattern was too consistent to ignore. By late October 1944, Panzer divisions along the Western Front were receiving urgent intelligence bulletins warning that American M10 tank destroyers might possess improved guns with greater penetration and range than previously believed. The bulletins provided no specific details because German intelligence had none. The intelligence failure deepens. The German intelligence failure regarding the M10A1 was more complete than their initial failure to detect the Pershing program. With the Pershing, German intelligence at least knew Americans were attempting to develop heavy tanks. With the M10A1, they had no indication that Americans were modifying a weapon system they thought they understood completely. Fremde Heere West, the Wehrmacht intelligence section, responsible for analyzing Allied forces, maintained detailed files on American tank destroyers. These files included captured technical manuals, photographs of destroyed vehicles, and debriefings from crews who had faced M10s in combat. Everything in these files indicated the M10 carried a 3-inch gun with known penetration limits. When reports of long-range M10 kills began arriving in October 1944, intelligence analysts faced a difficult problem. Either multiple tank commanders were badly mistaken about engagement ranges, or American tank destroyers had been upgraded in ways that left no evidence in captured vehicles or documents. The first captured M10A1 wasn't identified as different until early November 1944, when German engineers examining a destroyed vehicle near Metz noticed the gun bore was slightly larger than expected. Detailed measurements confirmed it was 76 millimeters, not 3 inches, as intelligence files indicated. This discovery should have triggered immediate dissemination throughout the Panzerwaffe. Instead, the information moved through channels slowly. The examining engineer's report went to his direct superior, who forwarded it to division intelligence, which sent it to corps level, where it was evaluated by analysts who had to reconcile it with existing intelligence that said all M10s carried 3-inch guns. By the time updated intelligence bulletins reached frontline tank units in late November 1944, German crews had spent 6 weeks engaging M10s based on outdated information. The casualty reports were telling. Panther losses to M10s had increased significantly compared to earlier periods, with a disturbing number showing frontal penetrations at ranges that should have been safe. The intelligence failure extended beyond just identifying the gun upgrade. German analysts struggled to understand why Americans would upgrade the M10 rather than develop an entirely new tank destroyer. The German approach to weapons development emphasized creating new designs for new requirements. The American approach of continuously improving existing designs was foreign to German military thinking. More fundamentally, German intelligence couldn't understand the American production philosophy. Americans had thousands of M10s in service. Modifying them to accept improved guns meant those thousands of vehicles became more capable without requiring entirely new production lines. Germans, who struggled to maintain production of any single tank model, couldn't conceive of this kind of systematic upgrade program. Tactical implications for German crews. The discovery that M10s could threaten Panthers at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards forced a fundamental rethinking of German tank tactics. Doctrine developed since 1943 had been based on specific range assumptions. Panthers could engage M10s at 1,500 yards with near impunity. M10s could only effectively threaten Panthers below 500 yards, and then only with side or rear shots. These range assumptions shaped every aspect of German tank tactics against American forces. Advance routes were planned around maintaining standoff distances. Defensive positions were chosen based on fields of fire that kept M10s at ineffective ranges. Engagement priorities placed M10s low on the target priority list compared to Sherman tanks with 76mm guns or British Fireflies. All of these tactical assumptions became questionable in late October 1944. If M10s could penetrate Panther frontal armor at 1,200 yards, German crews could no longer assume they had a safe standoff range. Every engagement with what appeared to be an M10 became a calculated risk. The psychological impact was immediate and severe. German tank commanders who had learned to identify and prioritize threats based on specific weapon characteristics could no longer trust their threat assessment. An M10 might carry the original 3-inch gun, making it a low-priority target, or it might carry the 76mm gun, making it potentially the most dangerous vehicle on the battlefield. Panther crews developed a harsh rule: engage all M10s immediately, regardless of range or tactical situation. Better to waste ammunition destroying a low-threat original M10 than to ignore what might be an M10A1 that could kill you at 1,000 yards. This doctrine shift had significant tactical consequences. German tanks that should have been engaging high-value targets like command vehicles or artillery observers were instead prioritizing tank destroyer kills. Ammunition expenditure increased as crews fired at M10s at extended ranges rather than closing to ensure kills. Movement patterns became more cautious as commanders tried to identify M10 types before committing to engagement. The tactical paralysis was similar to what Tiger crews would experience months later when Pershings appeared. Unable to identify whether they faced old or new variants of American weapons, German crews adopted worst-case assumptions that degraded their tactical effectiveness even when facing older weapons. Production mathematics and strategic impact. What German tank crews never fully understood during late 1944 was the scale of American tank destroyer production and the systematic upgrade program that was transforming the force. By November 1944, American factories had produced approximately 4,600 M10 tank destroyers. Of these, roughly 1,000 had been modified to M10A1 standard with 76mm guns. The production and modification infrastructure demonstrated American industrial advantages that went beyond simple numbers. Fisher Tank Arsenal could modify an existing M10 to M10A1 standard in approximately 48 hours. The process involved removing the old gun, installing the new mount and gun, rebalancing the turret, and conducting test firing. Workers became so proficient that modification times decreased throughout the program. More significantly, American logistics allowed modified vehicles to reach frontline units within weeks of leaving the factory. The supply chain from Fisher Tank Arsenal to forward units in France operated with efficiency German logistics officers studied but couldn't replicate. Rail transport to East Coast ports, Atlantic crossing, rail transport through France, final delivery to tank destroyer battalions, all occurred in predictable timeframes that allowed systematic force upgrades. German tank production, by comparison, struggled with consistency. Total German tank and assault gun production in November 1944 reached approximately 1,000 units, but these represented multiple different types with limited parts commonality. Modifications to existing designs often required months of testing and approval before implementation. The idea of systematically upgrading thousands of vehicles already in service was beyond German industrial capacity. These strategic implications were profound. Americans were improving existing weapons faster than Germans could develop responses. By the time German intelligence confirmed M10s had been upgraded and frontline units adjusted tactics, Americans were already deploying improved ammunition that further increased penetration. The T4 high-velocity armor-piercing round, which began reaching units in December 1944, could penetrate Panther frontal armor at 1,500 yards, extending the effective engagement range even further. German crews found themselves in a technological race they couldn't win. American industry could upgrade thousands of existing vehicles while maintaining new production, field improved ammunition in massive quantities, and systematically replace losses at rates that kept American tank destroyer battalions at full strength throughout the winter of 1944 and 1945. The psychological breaking point. The cumulative psychological effect of discovering American tank destroyer capabilities paralleled the impact of the Pershing's appearance. German tank crews had sustained their fighting spirit through material shortages, numerical inferiority, and constant retreat, partly because they believed in their technological superiority. Learning that Americans had quietly upgraded thousands of tank destroyers undermined this fundamental assumption. Veterans of Panzer Lehr Division, which faced intensive M10A1 deployments during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, consistently described the psychological impact as severe. They could no longer assume any American vehicle was safe to ignore. The distinctive silhouette of an M10 that once meant an easy kill now potentially meant a vehicle that could penetrate their frontal armor at ranges they considered safe. The uncertainty was paralyzing. German crews developed elaborate identification procedures trying to distinguish original M10s from M10A1s at distance. Gun barrel length, hull markings, unit insignia, anything that might indicate whether they faced the old 3-inch gun or the new 76mm weapon. None of these identification methods were reliable. The psychological breaking point came not from any single engagement, but from the cumulative realization that Americans could systematically improve their weapons faster than Germans could respond. The M10 upgrade was just one example. Sherman tanks were being upgunned with 76mm weapons. Tank destroyers were receiving improved ammunition. American industry was closing the quality gap while maintaining massive quantitative superiority. Interrogations of German tank crews captured in December 1944 and January 1945 revealed a common theme. They had expected Americans to rely on numerical superiority and superior air power. They hadn't expected Americans to systematically improve weapons to match German quality. The combination of quantity and improving quality created a sense of facing an inevitable defeat. The Bulge, M10A1s in defensive operations. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided the most intensive testing of M10A1 capabilities against German armor. Tank destroyer battalions equipped with M10A1s played crucial roles in defensive operations, particularly around Bastogne and Saint-Vith. The open-top design that German crews had mocked as a fatal weakness proved advantageous in the defensive role, allowing excellent observation and rapid target acquisition. During the defense of Saint-Vith, elements of the 14th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M10A1s, engaged German armor at ranges that would have been impossible with original M10s. On December 17, 1944, M10A1s of B Company engaged Panthers from Panzer Brigade 150 at ranges exceeding 1,400 yards, destroying 4 Panthers and damaging 2 others before withdrawing. The engagement was notable because it occurred in conditions of poor visibility, with snow and fog limiting observation. German Panthers advancing in what they considered a secure formation were engaged at ranges they thought were safe from American tank destroyers. The psychological impact on surviving German crews was severe. Similar engagements occurred throughout the Bulge fighting. At Bastogne, M10A1s, positioned in the defensive perimeter, repeatedly engaged German armor at extended ranges. Tank destroyer crews operating from prepared positions with excellent fields of fire could engage German tanks approaching the town at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. The tactical advantage went beyond just range. M10A1 crews in defensive positions could use terrain and camouflage to remain undetected until firing. The first indication German crews had of M10A1 presence was often the impact of a 76mm round on their armor. By the time they identified the threat and returned fire, the M10A1 might have already displaced to an alternate position. German after-action reports from units that participated in the Bulge offensive consistently mentioned difficulties dealing with American tank destroyers. The reports noted that M10s appeared to have greater range and penetration than intelligence indicated, and that they were being employed more aggressively than in previous engagements. Technical analysis: why the upgrade worked. The success of the M10A1 upgrade program rested on several technical factors that Germans failed to appreciate fully. The M10's chassis and turret, while lightly armored, were overbuilt compared to the original 3-inch gun's requirements. This gave engineers margin to install a more powerful weapon without requiring extensive redesign. The 76mm A1 gun was itself a masterpiece of American engineering efficiency. derived from the 3-inch anti-aircraft gun. It provided excellent penetration while maintaining reliability and reasonable ammunition weight. The gun's recoil system, carefully engineered to minimize forces transmitted to the mount, allowed installation in the M10 turret without catastrophic structural modifications. American metallurgy contributed significantly. The tungsten carbide cores in T4 high-velocity armor-piercing rounds represented advanced materials science. The Germany, cut off from tungsten sources by 1944, couldn't match. Even when German engineers captured intact rounds and understood their construction, they couldn't replicate them due to material shortages. The ammunition supply chain was equally important. American logistics could deliver specialized ammunition to frontline units in quantities that allowed routine use. German crews, by contrast, often had to carefully ration their best armor-piercing ammunition, using standard rounds for most engagements and reserving tungsten-cored rounds for critical situations. Perhaps most significant was the incremental improvement philosophy. Instead of waiting to develop a perfect next-generation tank destroyer, Americans continuously improved existing designs. The M10A1 wasn't revolutionary, just systematically better than the original M10. This approach allowed rapid fielding of improved capabilities while maintaining production of proven designs. German engineers who examined captured M10A1s after the war consistently noted the practical efficiency of American design. Components were standardized, maintenance was simplified, and the entire vehicle was designed for ease of production and repair rather than maximum performance. This philosophy allowed Americans to field thousands of capable vehicles rather than hundreds of superior ones. Winter, 1945. The revised threat assessment. By January 1945, German tank units throughout the Western Front had received revised intelligence assessments on American tank destroyers. The bulletins confirmed that M10s carrying 76mm guns were widespread and should be considered high-priority threats. Engagement recommendations were updated to treat all M10s as potentially carrying the upgraded weapon. The practical effect was to further degrade German tactical effectiveness. Panzer commanders now had to assume worst-case scenarios for multiple American weapon systems. Shermans might carry 76mm guns, and 10s probably carried 76mm guns. And somewhere out there were Pershings with 90mm guns that could threaten Tigers. The cumulative uncertainty created tactical paralysis. German tanks that should have been advancing aggressively instead moved cautiously, trying to identify threats before committing to engagement. Commanders expended ammunition engaging targets at extended ranges rather than closing to ensure kills. Recovery operations to retrieve damaged tanks became increasingly risky as crews feared M10A1s positioned in Overwatch. Tank units transferred from the Eastern Front experienced severe culture shock. They arrived expecting to face Shermans with 75mm guns that couldn't threaten Panthers frontally. Instead, they found an enemy equipped with multiple weapons systems that could kill Panthers at combat ranges. The psychological adjustment was difficult, and unit effectiveness suffered during the transition period. The winter fighting of 1945 saw German armor increasingly relegated to defensive positions. Mobile operations that had characterized German panzer tactics since 1939 became too risky against an enemy that could engage effectively at extended ranges. Defensive positions offered some protection, but even then American artillery and air power could neutralize static positions. The final accounting statistical analysis of M10A1 effectiveness is complicated by incomplete records and the difficulty of attributing specific kills to specific weapon systems. However, certain patterns emerge from available data. Tank destroyer battalions equipped with M10A1s showed higher kill ratios than those with original M10s. Engagement ranges increased significantly, with M10A1s regularly engaging German armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 yards. Perhaps more tellingly, German loss reports showed a significant increase in frontal penetrations attributed to tank-destroyer fire after October 1944. This suggests M10A1s were successfully engaging German armor in situations where original M10s would have been ineffective. The production numbers tell their own story. By war's end, approximately 1,200 M10s had been upgraded to M10A1 standard, with hundreds more upgrades planned before Japan's surrender made them unnecessary. The systematic upgrade of over 20% of the M10 force demonstrated American industrial flexibility that Germany couldn't match. More broadly, the M10A1 program demonstrated how Americans won the technological race in World War II, not through revolutionary breakthroughs, but through systematic improvement of existing designs, efficient production, reliable logistics, and the ability to field weapons in quantities that made technological advantages meaningful. Legacy and lessons. German tank crews who survived the war consistently identified the discovery of upgraded American tank destroyers as a pivotal moment in their combat experience. Veterans described it as the point where they realized American forces weren't just numerous, they were becoming technically capable. The combination was psychologically devastating. The M10A1 remained in service with American forces through 1945, seeing action in the final battles in Germany. Post-war, many were transferred to Allied nations where they served for years. Some saw combat in the Korean War, demonstrating the basic soundness of the design. For military historians, the M10A1 program offers lessons about weapons development that remain relevant. The success of upgrading existing weapons rather than waiting for perfect new designs, the importance of reliable logistics to deliver advanced ammunition, the psychological impact of technological surprise, all demonstrate principles that shaped Cold War weapons development. German tankers had mocked the M10 Wolverine as inadequate, a defensive weapon with limited capability against their superior armor. They never knew until 76mm guns started penetrating Panthers at 1,200 yards that Americans had systematically upgraded a weapon system they thought they understood completely. The psychological transformation that occurred among German armored crews in late 1944 was not simply a reaction to a new weapon. It was a collapse in belief. For years, German tankers had enjoyed a sense of technological superiority, particularly when facing American tanks. The Panzer IV, Panther, and Tiger were not just armored vehicles, they were icons of German engineering, symbols of what the Wehrmacht believed was its intellectual and industrial edge. American armor, by contrast, was often dismissed as inferior, mass-produced junk designed by amateurs, powered by gasoline engines, and clothed in weak armor. That dismissive attitude functioned almost as doctrine. In early 1944, firing on an American M10 tank destroyer at long range was considered routine. Some crews even practice-fired at them for amusement, confident that the thinly armored American vehicle posed no real threat. By late 1944, that mockery had turned into fear. The reason for this shift was not that the United States suddenly introduced a new wonder weapon like the Pershing or the T-26E3. Instead, the shift was born from something uniquely American: practical modification at scale. American engineers, soldiers, and production planners took something old and familiar, the M10 Wolverine, and transformed it into the M10A1, an upgraded, lethal, and psychologically disruptive weapon. What made it extraordinary was not its revolutionary design, but its efficiency. It kept everything the American war machine valued: reliability, producibility, and adaptability, but added what it had lacked: range and lethality. The M10A1 didn't need to be invulnerable. It just had to be good enough to kill German tanks, and do it by the hundreds. That was exactly what it did. The technological awakening, the long 76mm gun. The heart of the M10A1 transformation lay not in its armor, which remained light, nor in its silhouette, which still exposed the crew. The real change was the adoption of the long-barreled 76mm gun, similar to the one later used on upgraded M4 Shermans. This gun fundamentally altered battlefield dynamics. Unlike the short 75mm guns previously used, which struggled to penetrate German armor at typical combat ranges, the long 76mm could engage and kill Panzer IVs, Panthers, and even Tigers under the right conditions. Most importantly, it could do so at ranges previously believed safe by German doctrine. German training emphasized one key advantage: American tanks could not penetrate German armor beyond about 800 meters. Panther crews, especially, were taught to engage at long range, 1,200 meters, 1,500 meters, sometimes even 2,000 meters, and destroy advancing American armor before it could reach its own effective firing distance. This approach had worked consistently through 1943 and much of 1944. Then, suddenly it didn't. Reports began trickling in from the front, Panthers taking hits at 1,400 meters, Panzer IVs burning at 1,200 meters, tank crews stunned that an M10 of all vehicles could hit them at those ranges. At first they assumed British 17-pounders or Soviet weapons must have been involved. They believed American units had borrowed foreign guns. The assumption made them feel safer, because if the Americans were developing their own weapons, that was far more dangerous. When crews finally confirmed that it was not new tanks but upgraded old ones, modified en masse, the psychological damage was worse than if it had been a new design. This wasn't innovation the German military could hope to match. It was adaptation at scale. It was industrial agility, the American way of war, modification over replacement. The United States faced a logistics reality that most nations in wartime cannot even imagine. It had thousands of vehicles, tanks, half-tracks, trucks, tank destroyers, already in combat service. Instead of scrapping them and building entirely new designs, American planners did something deeply practical. They improved what already existed: modified guns, improved optics, better ammunition. In some cases, re-engined chassis. Most importantly, they did so in ways that did not disrupt production, logistics, or training. The result was the M10A1. Not sleek, not beautiful, not revolutionary, but profoundly dangerous. The Germans, by contrast, lived in a different technological universe. Their philosophy was perfection through engineering, even when perfection meant complications. The Tiger was powerful, but expensive, slow to build, and maintenance-heavy. The Panther was technically superior to most Allied tanks, but so complex that field repairs became a nightmare. Upgrading existing vehicles with major modifications the way the United States did was unthinkable in the German system. German tank designs were rigidly configured. Modifying them in the field was discouraged and sometimes impossible. So, when the M10A1 appeared in significant numbers, not just one or two test models, the fear was not of the vehicle itself, but of what it meant. It meant that the Americans could innovate without sacrificing production rate. It meant the Americans could improve their weapons faster than the Germans could respond. It meant the strategic balance had shifted. The collapse of technological confidence. By late 1944, German tank units no longer had the unstoppable attitude that had characterized previous campaigns. The Eastern Front had already drained much of their morale, but Western battles, especially in late 1944, brought a new kind of psychological strain. It wasn't just that the Americans had better weapons. It was that German tankers could no longer trust what they saw. A tank destroyer that looked like an M10 might be harmless, or it might be an M10A1. An M4 Sherman might be one of the older models they could kill at will, or it might be an M4A3E8 with improved armor and a 76mm gun capable of punching through their glaciers. That uncertainty was devastating. For years, German doctrine had promised certainty through technology. German tanks would win long engagements through superior optics, armor, and firepower. American tanks would only win by numbers. But now, German tankers were forced to acknowledge a new reality. The numbers themselves had become dangerous. That was the breaking point. The German armored corps had expected American quantity. They had not expected American quality within that quantity. One Panther crew member, interviewed after the war, described what he called the moment of realization. It was not that they had better tanks. It was that they could change. We could not. They could take an old tank and make it dangerous. We could barely keep ours running. That quote captures the heart of the fear. The Panther was a beautiful machine, but locked into its form. The M10 was ugly, but flexible. The unseen threat. Why? German crews never saw it coming. The most psychologically damaging aspect of the M10A1 transformation was that it was invisible. German crews had come to recognize the silhouette of the M10. Tall, angular, boxy, open-topped, thinly armored. A vehicle to be mocked, not respected. So when they saw it, the reaction was reflexive. Engage at long range. Destroy easily. Move forward. But when the long 76mm gun appeared, it did so subtly. The basic chassis remained unchanged. The profile was nearly identical. The Germans often didn't notice the difference until the gun fired. And by then, the engagement was over. This was far more terrifying than a revolutionary new tank. When the Pershing appeared in the final months of the war, it was intimidating, but visibly new. German crews could recognize it and adjust tactics, but the M10A1 hid in plain sight. It looked familiar, but behaved like something new. It was the embodiment of uncertainty. And uncertainty is a weapon. Mathematical defeat, how production numbers became psychological weapons. Even when German crews knew what they were facing, there was an even more demoralizing truth. They were facing not just a weapon, but a process. The United States could produce upgrades in numbers Germany could not comprehend. The question was not whether a new vehicle could be created. It was whether it could be created 1,000 times over. The long 76mm gun wasn't just a better weapon. It was a demonstration of industrial democracy at work. A system where production, adaptation, and feedback existed in synergy. Crews reported problems, engineers adapted designs, factories implemented changes in weeks, not years. Every battlefield experience fed back into the next iteration. And the M10A1 became the proof. The German war machine, by contrast, operated on a different rhythm. Slow, rigid, bound by complexity. Its tanks were masterpieces, but masterpieces don't scale. From pride to panic, the final emotional shift. By early 1945, morale among German tank crews was eroding rapidly. They still had powerful weapons. The Panther and Tiger tanks were still formidable, but confidence, the belief that they could win, had evaporated. Pride had been replaced by fear, then by calculation, and finally by despair. When German tankers looked through their optics at American vehicles, they no longer saw just targets. They saw uncertainty. They saw invisible upgrades. They saw potential death at a range that doctrine had promised was safe. They saw the collapse of everything they had believed about American engineering. Mockery had turned to fear. Fear had turned to disbelief. Disbelief had turned to resignation. Conclusion: a transformation that went deeper than armor. The M10A1 did not win the war. It did not turn battles alone, nor did it dismantle German armored divisions by sheer firepower, but it did something just as consequential. It broke German confidence. It proved that American innovation did not require abandoning mass production. It demonstrated that industrial democracy was not a weakness, but a strategic weapon. And it showed that flexibility could defeat perfection. In the end, the long 76mm gun was more than just a weapon. It was a message. The Americans could not just build more, they could build better, and they could do it faster than Germany could understand, let alone stop. That realization, quiet, slow, and devastating, was one of the final blows to German armored morale. The M10A1, the tank destroyer they never feared, until it was too late. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.